Hush falls over a dark forest. The only sound is the rhythmic clacking of steel wheels. On distant tracks, a group of figures moves silently through the trees, carrying something seemingly insignificant, a thin coil of wire. Imagine you're crouched in the freezing darkness of occupied Eastern Europe. 1943. The air is so cold, it burns your lungs. Every muscle is tense, not just from the cold, but from the knowledge that a single sound, a snapped twig, could mean death for you and your comrades. In your gloved hands is not a rifle or a block of explosives, but something that weighs almost nothing. A simple steel wire, perhaps the thickness of a pencil, coiled neatly over your shoulder. Your target, a 50-ton armored train, a Panzerzug bristling with machine guns, a 75mm cannon, and carrying over 100 battle-hardened German soldiers. Your mission? Stop it. With this, it sounds impossible, almost laughable, a child's toy against a steel dragon. Yet tonight, this flimsy strand will become one of the most ingenious and terrifying weapons in the partisan arsenal, a perfect fusion of physics and desperation. The story of how resistance fighters turned basic engineering into a devastating tool against Nazi armored trains reveals a truth often buried beneath the sanitized narratives of conventional warfare, that desperation breeds the most profound innovation, and that sometimes the most elegant solutions require nothing more than understanding your enemy's greatest strength and turning it into their fatal, catastrophic weakness. When Germany unleashed Operation Barbarossa upon the Soviet Union in 1941, they didn't just send men and tanks. They sent ghosts of the First World War, reborn in steel and fire. The armored train, to the Wehrmacht. These were not relics. They were the perfect instrument for the vast, porous territories of the East. The German military would eventually deploy over 70 of these mobile fortresses, each one a self-contained squadron of terror. They could project power hundreds of kilometers from the nearest railhead, their tracks acting as an umbilical cord to the war machine. They carried infantry, engineers, and heavy firepower, their cannons able to pulverize a village from kilometers away. For the occupiers, they were symbols of absolute control. For the partisans hiding in the forests, they were the embodiment of German technological supremacy, a seemingly invincible god of war, thundering through their homeland. The Germans understood the psychological value of these trains. The sight of the Panzerzug 62, Blücher, or the infamous Adler thundering through a town square was a performance of dominance. It was a message. We are everywhere. We can bring overwhelming force to your doorstep at any moment. Resistance fighters watched helplessly as these trains moved with impunity, their patrols strangling supply lines, reinforcing garrisons, and hunting down partisan groups with relentless efficiency. To attack one head-on was suicide. To ignore one was to let the noose tighten. But what the German High Command, obsessed with armor thickness and gun caliber, had failed to fully appreciate was that the very thing that gave these trains their power, their absolute dependence on two narrow strips of steel, was also their most profound vulnerability. And the weapon that would exploit this weakness would be something so primitive, so fundamentally simple, that no military engineer had ever even considered it a threat. It wasn't a weapon of destruction, but of misdirection. In the sprawling forests of Belarus, Ukraine, and Poland, resistance fighters faced a strategic nightmare. The partisans, often armed with little more than hunting rifles and Molotov cocktails, were being systematically hunted. The armored trains were the centerpiece of this anti-partisan strategy. They were mobile command posts, surveillance platforms, and rapid reaction forces all in one. Losing them was not an option for the Germans. Destroying them was the only option for the partisans. Explosives were the obvious answer, but they were notoriously unreliable. Mines were difficult to place without being detected, and the Germans often used decoy cars or dummy engines to draw out sabotage attempts. A failed attack meant reprisals, brutal and indiscriminate, against nearby villages. The partisans needed something better, something quieter, something that couldn't be traced. Then came the breakthrough, not from a military manual, but from a farm boy who remembered how to snare rabbits. The idea was brutally simple. An armored train, despite its 80 tons of mass, operated on a delicate balance. Its wheels were precisely flanged to hug the rails. If that balance was disturbed, if the wheels were pulled even slightly sideways, the immense momentum would do the rest. The weapon wouldn't be a charge that pushed the train off the tracks. It would be a wire that pulled it off. The technique was diabolically clever. A strong wire, often piano wire, or thick telegraph cable, was stretched taut between two solid anchor points, trees, telephone poles, or even rock outcroppings on opposite sides of a curved or embanked section of track. The height was critical, just low enough to escape a casual visual inspection by a train crew, but high enough to catch on the train's undercarriage, the bogie, or the cowcatcher. It wasn't a barrier. It was a hook. As the train's forward momentum engaged the wire, the physics became inescapable. The wire would slide along the smooth underside of the train until it snagged on something, anything, a bolt head, a crossbeam, a brake line. In that instant, the wire transformed from a passive trap into an immense lever. The forward energy of the train was converted into a sideways pulling force of incredible magnitude. It didn't need to be stronger than the train. It just needed to be stronger than the steel flanges holding the wheels to the rails. And it was. Every single time. What made this tactic so terrifying for the Germans was its ghost-like nature. It left no crater, no shrapnel, no chemical residue. After the wreck, there was just a snapped wire and a scene of impossible destruction. It was sabotage that looked like an accident. You are part of a 4-person team. The leader, a man they call the Forester, moves with a silence that seems unnatural. He points to 2 massive oaks. You and another member, a veteran with a face carved from stone, begin the work. Your hands are numb, but you move with practiced precision. You loop the wire around the first tree, using a special wrench to twist a crude but effective tensioner. The wire hums as you pull it across the tracks. The Forester crouches, using a small weighted string to gauge the height, a hand's breadth above the rail. He whispers, his voice barely disturbing the air. Any higher, we miss. Any lower, they see it. You adjust the wire, your heart pounding against your ribs. Every rustle of leaves sounds like a patrol. The moon is a sliver, offering just enough light to work, not enough to be seen. The 4th member of your team, a young boy no older than 17, stands watch. His eyes are wide with a mixture of fear and fierce determination. He is the reason you are here. His village was burned by a garrison, delivered by one of these steel beasts. The wire is secured to the 2nd tree. The Forester gives the final check, running his gloved hand along the taut strand. It feels alive, vibrating with potential energy. He nods. It is done. Your team melts back into the forest, finding a vantage point on a small ridge. 100 meters away, you lie in the snow, the cold seeping through your coat, and you wait. The wait is the worst part. Every minute stretches into an hour. You hear the distant cry of a wolf. The boy next to you shivers uncontrollably. Then, you hear it, a faint, rhythmic chuffing. It grows steadily louder, a deep-throated growl that seems to shake the very ground. The searchlights from the train stab through the darkness, sweeping across the trees. One beam passes inches over your head. You hold your breath, certain you've been seen, but it moves on. The train rounds the bend. It's a monster, a black beast crowned with fire from its smokestack. The sound is overwhelming now, a deafening roar of steel on steel. You can see the German soldiers on the platforms, their faces indifferent, bored. They are inside their fortress, safe from the world. They have no idea. They are approaching the wire at nearly 60 kilometers an hour. The moment of impact is strangely silent at first. A faint, high-pitched twang echoes across the valley, like a giant guitar string being snapped. Then, a horrible metallic screech. The massive train lurches violently, as if it has hit an invisible wall. You see sparks fly from the wheels. The sound of tearing metal is deafening, a scream of tortured steel. The engine car stays on the rails for a horrifying second, dragging the rest of the train with it. Before the laws of physics take over, the first artillery car jackknifes, lifting into the air, before crashing down onto its side. The following cars pile into it, a cascade of grinding, shrieking wreckage. The train doesn't just derail, it folds in on itself, a 50-ton toy crushed by an invisible hand. The aftermath is chaos. German soldiers, dazed and wounded, stumble from the wreckage. Partisan snipers positioned on the ridge open fire, not to kill, but to sow panic and prevent an organized response. Your job is done. You and your team slip away into the forest before the first reinforcements can arrive, leaving behind a scene of destruction that will haunt German commanders for months. In Berlin, the reports were initially met with disbelief. Unexplained derailment, structural failure, possible sabotage by unknown means. The engineers were baffled. They reinforced the train's pilot cowcatchers with thicker steel plates. They added heavy mesh grates to the undercarriage. But the partisans adapted. They simply used stronger wire, or they placed their traps on sharper curves, where the lateral forces were even greater. Oberst Richter, a logistics officer responsible for railway security, was a man who believed in order, in systems. This wire tactic was an affront to his entire worldview. They are using nothing, he roared at his subordinates. They are defeating our technology with a piece of string. Find out how, find out who, and make them stop. He demanded daily patrols, increased track inspections, and even floated the idea of arming the front of trains with massive plows to cut any wires. But the railways were thousands of kilometers long. The partisans only had to be right once. The Germans had to be right everywhere, all the time. The psychological toll was immense. The armored train, once a symbol of invincibility, was now a source of anxiety. German soldiers began to view the forests lining the tracks with a deep-seated fear. Every shadow could be a saboteur. Every straight stretch of track could be a trap. The confidence of the occupiers was slowly being eroded, not by armies, but by an idea. The wire technique was part of a broader philosophy of asymmetric warfare that defined the most effective partisan resistance. It wasn't about matching the enemy's strength. It was about creating dilemmas where the enemy's strength became a liability. It was the same logic that led them to fill glass bottles with gasoline and a flaming rag, the Molotov cocktail, to turn a tank's own engine air intake against it. It was the logic of fighting smart, not hard. Decades after the war, a former partisan leader was asked about the wire. He smiled faintly. The Germans, he said, they built a beautiful watch. All these gears, all these precision springs, they thought they were unbeatable because they had the best watch. We didn't try to build a better watch. We just dropped a single grain of sand into the gears. That is all it took. The legacy of this simple tactic is a powerful lesson that echoes in modern conflicts. It demonstrates that technological superiority can be neutralized not by a counter-technology, but by a counter-thought. It is the foundational principle of insurgency, of asymmetric warfare, from the IEDs of Iraq and Afghanistan to the cyber attacks of today. The goal is not to destroy the enemy's strength, but to make it irrelevant, to turn it into a costly, vulnerable burden. Today, as we ride in comfort and safety on trains that are marvels of engineering, it's easy to forget that these ribbons of steel were once the front lines of a brutal war. The story of how partisans used a single wire to derail an armored train is more than just a clever trick from history. It's a testament to the resilience of the human spirit under occupation. It's a reminder that the most powerful force in war is not always the biggest gun or the thickest armor, but the human mind, pushed to the edge of desperation and finding in that moment a spark of genius. The next time you see a train moving along its tracks, remember the silent hunters in the frozen forests and the invisible weapon that brought a steel giant to its knees. If you found this story of wartime ingenuity fascinating, there are countless other tales of unconventional resistance waiting to be discovered.